Good afternoon, sir.
Well, good afternoon to you too, Madam President. It's good to see you here.
Thank you.
I rise to make some comments about the proposed bill.
Please proceed, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. It's no secret that where I stand on this bill, I've opposed this, the SEBAC deal for the last 2 weeks publicly, and I want to begin by clarifying that my criticism of the deal is in no way intended to be a criticism of state employees. In fact, two of my immediate neighbors, one to my left and one across the street from me, are DOC officers. And I've had the good pleasure of working with many state employees. Only last week I was at Crystal Lake in Middletown, and a DEEP employee was with me at 6:30 at night on his time. And that's just one example. And even over the weekend, I was speaking with OFA employees who were answering my questions about the SEBAC deal. So I make my criticism of the deal aimed at the deal itself and not at the state employees or any complaint whatsoever about our state employees. But I believe the vote on this deal has to be made in the context of the situation, in the context of the extraordinary situation that we're in financially here in Connecticut. As someone who's a financial person who's worked in the financial world, in the business world for over 45 years now, I would say to describe Connecticut's present financial condition as a crisis is an understatement. We're in a catastrophe, a financial meltdown of unprecedented proportions that every day gets worse. And when we look at the SEBAC deal, we cannot ignore that situation and those facts and circumstances that we're operating under. A few months ago, my colleagues in my caucus, the Senate Republicans, conducted a very, very detailed analysis of the budget projections and went through line by line, over 1,400 line items in our budget. They looked in every nook and cranny in the budget and identified many savings and changes that could account for about 60% of the projected $5.1 billion deficit. But at that point in time, they reached a dead end. There wasn't any more possibility of cutting expenses further without hurting people deeply, and we wanted to avoid that in our budget. Consequently, we were hoping and praying that the SEBAC deal could account for the missing 40%. And I want to reiterate that. We're not depending on state employees putting the entire burden on their backs. In fact, what we've identified is 150% more than what we're expecting from the state employees as far as what we need to balance the budget and to avoid the devastating consequences of tax increases, cutbacks to the disabled, or shifting the burden to our cities and towns. And indeed, if the SEBAC agreement is approved as it stands right now, there are no other choices, ladies and gentlemen. You, by voting for this agreement, will vote for either a tax increase or passing on the costs to our cities and towns, like the governor himself already proposed in the form of the teachers' retirement pension obligations, or cutting services to the disabled and the most needy. Already, we've seen the consequence of that with the governor's executive order and the impact on the intellectually disabled community, for example. So, as constructed, the proposed agreement leaves us only with a choice between bad and worse. The question is it unreasonable to have hoped for a better SEBAC deal? And you know, based on my conversations with individual state employees, I'm convinced that many of them are greatly concerned about the state of Connecticut's condition and were ready to work with us to really help us balance the budget without the catastrophe that's imminent. For example, many of them said to me that they expected and were willing to give up their their longevity bonuses. And they were actually pleasantly surprised to find out that the deal does not require them to give up their longevity bonuses. But virtually every state employee that I spoke to regarding that was already willing to do so, yet it was not part of the agreement. So I want to take a look for a second at how the SEBAC deal does affect the average state employee. I'm going to go over some numbers that I reviewed with the Office of Fiscal Analysis for independent corroboration. And what SEBAC requires in the first 2 years is an increase in contributions to the pension fund of 1.5%. In addition, it requires 3 unpaid furlough days. For the average state employee, based on my review with the Office of Fiscal Analysis, that's tantamount to about $1,100 per year more in contributions toward the retirement plan, and about an $850 loss in terms of the furlough days. Taken together for the first 2 years, the out-of-pocket cost to state employees, the average state employee, would be about $3,000. But only 12 months from now, July of 2019, the SEBAC deal calls for a bonus to be paid to state employees. That bonus is the greater of $2,000 or $1,000 plus their step increase. When we reviewed the average compensation of a state employee with OFA, it was determined that that theoretical employee would be getting just under a $3,000 bonus. In other words, the state employee was getting a bonus that was roughly equivalent to what the increased pension contributions would be and the 3 furlough days would cost. Then in July 2019, 2 years from now, the salary increases go into effect, the COLA. The cost of living increase would come into effect at 3.5%, followed by step increases and adjustments in the step increases. And again, these are numbers I reviewed with the Office of Fiscal Analysis, and roughly the steps are not all paid at the same time, but generally speaking, from what the OFA told me, January is a common date. So after the July 3.5% increase, there would be a step increase in January, and then that same July, in July of 2020, there would be another 3.5% increase, followed the following January by another step increase. And when we took this and applied this to the average state employee, it amounted to a $10,000 plus increase in pay over that 18-month period of time. Now, at the same time, at that point with the SEBAC agreement, the state employee would be ponying up, again, $1,100. Well, now it would increase because their salary increased. They would be ponying up $1,600 or so to the pension, and they'd be responsible for paying more money into the health care cost. And again, according to OFA, at that point in time, it would be about $600 more per year. So at that point in time, the state employee, the theoretical average state employee, would be making a little over $10,000 more per year and would be paying out about $2,300 more in benefit cost. I think state employees, when they really see the real numbers, will be pleasantly surprised by the SEBAC concessions deal. And I'm convinced that it does, unfortunately, represent an opportunity loss for us, because the upfront savings at the front end of the deal are going to be, unfortunately, more than offset by the losses and the increased cost on the back end of the deal. Just at the wrong time, by the way. For the next biennium, when we'll be looking at a situation where the increased cost of the SEBAC deal are going to come into play, and if our state hasn't recovered economically, you think we have a big problem now. Just wait to 2 years from now, when now we're staring at a situation with these cost increases kicking in, and at the same time, the state's still lagging behind. You would think we would have learned our lesson from the mistakes we made in the past, but apparently we haven't. Indeed, I'm very much afraid and very concerned that if this opportunity lost, the passage of this agreement does happen, we are going to be faced with no good choices to balance the budget. We are going to either have to pass a tax increase, we're going to have to shift costs to the cities and towns, hello, teachers' pension fund, we're going to be talking about cutting services to the disabled, just like is happening right here today, when intellectually disabled children are being thrown out onto the streets from the agencies that were taking care of them because their funding's been cut by the current executive order. The approval of the SEBAC deal guarantees nothing but destructive choices for us, and in my opinion will accelerate the ruination of Connecticut. I won't be a part of that. I won't be a part of approving a deal, unfortunately, that sets us up for failure, and I won't be a part of the destructive decisions of the budget that will follow from it. I urge anyone in the circle who still has an open mind about this to give very strong consideration to the long-term consequences. I thank the state employees for what they have been willing to do, but I do think that their willingness was underestimated by their own leadership. I believe in the goodwill of the state employees, and I believe they would have been willing to do even more if presented in the proper way. And I do thank them for their service to the state. So in closing, I want to urge all of you not to reject the state employees, but to reject a deal that's an untenable deal, a deal that sets us up for failure. And then let's get back to the table and put together a deal that really does benefit the state of Connecticut and does allow us to balance the budget without the destructive consequences of this deal, and sets us up for a long-term future that's bright for not only everyone in Connecticut and the state employees themselves. A healthier state, financially speaking, is in everyone's interest, the state employees and every citizen of this state. Therefore, I urge my fellow colleagues here in the Senate to think long and hard about the dire consequences of approval of this agreement. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Who you and Marks?